this morning we are wrapping up our bucket list series, and kind of give you a quick reminder, we've been kind of parked ourselves in Daniel chapter 5, verses 25 and 26, and kind of give you catch you up to speed for some of you that may be new. In Daniel chapter 5, a guy by the name of King Belshazzar is having a feast. And as he's having this feast, he brings out some sacred objects, some goblets that had been brought in from conquest when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem and conquered Judah. And as he begins to do this, he begins to worship gods of the gold and of silver, of wood, stone, bronze, iron, that sort of thing, and begin to mock, really, God. And in the midst of the feast, a hand appears on a wall. And when the hand appears on the wall, it writes 3 words. And then this is the inscription that we find. It's in Daniel chapter 5, verses 25. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parson. And we've been taking a look at those words. If you kind of remember the first word, that word mene, it's listed twice. But it meant numbered. And what that means is that our days are numbered. And I know it's kind of an odd thing to think about in church, but this idea that we do. Our days are numbered. We only have a certain time of life here on this earth. And because of that, oftentimes our attitudes is impacted by our expectations. If we expect to live a long life, and we expect to live, 90, 95, 100 years, as we know that people have, sometimes we put off things because there will always be time. And it was kind of one of those things with King Belshazzar. Here he is having this feast when outside the city walls, there was an army, and it wasn't an army that just had appeared. It was an army that had been there for a while. But King Belshazzar was confident that he would have another night. And so while his city is under attack, Belshazzar parties. And if you kind of know the rest of the story, Belshazzar's life is ended that night by that invading army. And so because we want our days to count, and because we want to make the most of every opportunity, we kind of moved into the second word with that word there, tekel, which means weighed. And we kind of began to take a look at this idea of scales and using scales to show that it really shows a starting point, where we begin life and where we begin our journey. It's that good baseline that we have. And after that, it begins to show areas that we lose, the scales do. And so when we weigh ourselves, sometimes we see areas that we lose in. We talked about the areas of sin, of worry, of fear, and how we needed to be losing those things. The other side of the scale, and this is the side we don't often like to talk about, is the scale also shows where we have gained. And, while we don't like that in our physical bodies and in the physical realm, it is something that we need to be aware of in our spiritual and our emotional and our relational and in our journey with God. There need to be areas where we were growing. And so we begin to ask ourselves, how am I growing as a disciple? How am I helping others grow as a disciple? And to that, it brings some weight to our days. And it's kind of, if you remember, we've talked about these 3 things, these 3 words kind of build upon each other. This morning, we're going to close out by taking a look at that last word, parson, which for King Belshazzar, it meant divided. And what was going to happen is, if you kind of read verse 26 of Daniel chapter 5, Daniel lets King Belshazzar know that your kingdom is going to be divided between the Medes and the Persians, which is the invading army that was sitting outside his gates. And if you kind of know the rest of the story of Daniel, that's who Daniel now serves under. Daniel serves under King Cyrus and some other Medes and Persians, but his kingdom is divided. Now, for us, we're like, okay, I don't have a kingdom, no one's invading me. What does it mean for us? And that's what we're going to take a look at this morning, is what does it mean for our lives? And how do we make sure that we don't live divided lives? There's always, if you want a spot to follow along, there's a spot on the back of your bulletin to take notes if you prefer the electronic version. You can open up your smartphones, open up the YouVersion Bible app, and under the events section, look for the Rock Church, and there you'll find all the notes and all the scripture that we're going to be using, as well as a couple devotional plans to help you kind of process this as even we go deeper this week. But before we begin, let's stop and ask God to speak to us. Heavenly Father, this morning, we just ask that you come and you speak to us. Over these next few moments, may your voice be the one that we hear. May your voice be the one that, Father, we're attentive to. And Father, may it do something and may it change us. And so, God, remove the distractions, remove the worries, remove the to-do lists, remove everything that might be running around in our heads right now. And Father, may we just be able to focus on you and who you are and, Father, what you want to accomplish here this morning, because there is something that you want to do. And so, Father, open our ears. May we hear you. And we ask all this in your name. Amen. Oftentimes, when it comes to our bucket list, these are things that we're probably just not going to go out and do. It's going to take some forethought. It's going to take some planning. It's why they're bucket list items, because it requires some time. I can remember Aaron and I, when we were getting ready to celebrate our 10-year anniversary, we wanted to do something special, and we wanted to kind of go somewhere. The kids were still young enough that that we didn't have to worry about school for them, and we're like, you know what, we can find some people to watch them. So let's go on a trip. And we thought, you know what better place to go than Hawaii? Now, if you've ever been to Hawaii, you know it's not just something that you pick up and go. It creates a little bit of planning, and not only does it create a little bit of planning, it creates a little bit of time to save up for that trip. And so we started to look at the budget, and we're like, okay, how do we save up for this? Well, at the time, I was refereeing basketball. It was a high school and junior high ref at the time, and we thought, you know what, for 2 years, all the money that I get from reffing will go towards paying for our trip for Hawaii. And so we kind of had started to set aside that money, and so when the schools would pay me, as tempting as it was to say, well, we could go out to dinner with this, or we could use this money for this, we set it aside. And after about 2 years of basketball, we were able to take our vacation for about 10 days to Hawaii. And it was hard during that time, because you have this end goal in mind of where you want to be, and at the same time you sort of have, and these weren't like huge checks. It was like $50 here, $50 there, and it would have been very easy to say, well, you know what, we can spend that on something else. We could use that on something else, or we could put it to something else that we want to do, or something else that we want to buy. It took some focus. I think I may have said this before, but I need to teach Owen how to drive. He's going to be 16 this August, and so we've started a little bit. And I've had him in the school parking lot, teaching him how to drive, and you can't take a curve at 40 miles an hour sometimes, and those type of things that you just don't know because you've never driven a car before. And I can remember one of the very first things that I can remember learning in driver's ed, and when I was taught to drive, was where you look is where the car goes. Now, as adults, we've learned to compensate for that. We know that we can look off in the field to count the deer, and we've learned how to control the car and keep it straight. But when you're learning, that's exactly what happens. If you look off to the right or to the left for too long, guess what? Your car is going to drift to the right or to the left. And you have that moment where your focus is generally where the car is going to begin to go. It's very much the way it is in life when it comes to our bucket list. If we lose focus on where we are headed, we can begin to drift. And again, this is not in the small things. This is not necessarily in the things that we want to do, but more this is in the terms of who we want to be and who God is calling us to be, and the people that He wants us to be. We talked about, we want to make sure that our days are weighed and that there is some substance to them. We want to make sure that our days are, because they are numbered, that we have some significance to them and they're not just wasted. And so to do that, we need to make sure that we don't live a divided life. And so how do we do that? How do we make sure that we don't begin to drift? And I don't know if you've noticed this. This is something that I'm sure someone has made a lot of money on at some point. But if you've driven 27 north, I think once you get out of Portland a little bit, maybe into Geneva, I noticed it the other day, I was coming south. But to keep cars from drifting, someone has created this beautiful thing called rumble strips. Now, you don't have them a lot of times on city roads. You just have curbs. And if you hit the curb, that means you're starting to drift. But what are rumble strips for? It's not so that they make that incredible sound when your tires cross them, and you can kind of wake everybody up that's in the back seat or whatever, or because it gives such soothing music. What are they designed for? They're designed to let you know, listen, you're getting off course. Your car's beginning to drift, and those rumble strips are designed to create a sound in the car that if you are sleeping, it wakes you up. Or if you're just like daydreaming, it kind of brings you back to reality. And you're like, okay, I need to correct. And if you notice now, no longer is it just on the edge of the road. It is now also in the center of the road. And especially, I think every newer roads, all highways, they have this. Even now sometimes when a town puts a new stop sign in, they will put these in to let you know that, hey, listen, you need to pay attention. And as I got to thinking about that, and I got to thinking about our life, I think there are some rumble strips in our life. Some things that we need to pay attention to, that if these things begin to happen, it should serve as a wake-up call to us that, hey, listen, maybe I'm losing focus. Maybe the things that God wants me to do, the person that God wants me to be, maybe there's some things here that I'm losing focus on, and I need to begin to correct myself. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, okay? There may be things that you're sitting there thinking of, and when you think about that, you're like, man, he could have talked about that. And I could have. So this is not an exhaustive list, but I think these are maybe 4 of the more important ones that I think we need to be aware of. And the first rumble strip that I think we need to be aware of in our life is unhealthy patterns. Let's face it, we've all had those times when days don't go well. You know, you've had a bad day at work. You've had a bad day at school. You just woke up on the wrong side of the bed, and you've had a bad day. Things haven't gone the way that you want them to. You fought with a friend. You know, maybe you've gotten pulled over. Those things that just seem to ruin your day. And we all have them. I mean, there's none of us that can go through life and say, well, I haven't had those moments. I haven't had those moments when my life has been, thrown in turmoil, when the day hasn't gone the way that I want it to do. And when that happens, we tend to have those things that we fall back on. It's the stereotypical thing, and kind of movies have portrayed this. What happens, when, the couple breaks up and the girl is devastated? What do we usually, the movies portray her doing? Well, she's sitting on the couch, watching Hallmark movies, eating chocolate out of the box or eating ice cream out of the container. I heard, and I don't remember who told me this, but someone said, if you ever come home and your wife is eating ice cream out of the container, don't ask her how her day has been, okay? You just let it go, but we all have, and it's stereotypical, and we may have other things that we do, but we have those things that we fall back on when life doesn't go the way that we do. Some drink. Life doesn't go the way that I want. My day's been bad. I'm going to go home and I'm going to have a drink. Some eat. Some binge watch Netflix. We have those things that are the comfort. They are coping mechanisms. And it's not just when things go wrong, but sometimes if we're bored, I don't have anything to do, what should I do? If there's nothing pressing on the list, I'm frustrated. I'm hurt. I'm happy. Maybe there are things that we do when we're happy that we fall back on, the patterns that we have. The problem comes is when those patterns that we form, they aren't healthy. And I'm not just talking about physical health. I'm not just talking, well, it's not good to binge eat. You shouldn't binge eat. It's not good to overdrink. That does affects to your body that you don't want to deal with long term. I'm not just talking about the physical impact of things. I'm talking about the relational and the emotional and the spiritual health as well. There's an interesting verse in 1 Corinthians. Paul's talking, and he has this incredible revelation. And I think sometimes it goes to this unhealthy patterns thing. And this is what he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23. I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. And I think what happens is sometimes our coping mechanisms, sometimes those patterns that we find ourselves falling into, it's not that it's right or wrong, it's not healthy. It's not healthy that we're dealing with our problems this way. It's not healthy that we're dealing with a bad day in this way. It's not healthy that we're dealing with our boredom this way. And so as we begin to look at our coping mechanisms, as we begin to look at the things that we do in those moments, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, are these things healthy? Are these things beneficial to me, to my emotional health, to my spiritual health, to my relationship with Christ? And when it comes to these unhealthy patterns, I think one of the biggest things that it might be the signal for us is sometimes when these happens, sin all of a sudden becomes attractive. Well, I've had a bad day, so I can do this because it'll make me feel better. And even though if it's just for a moment, even if it's just for this brief second, it will ease the pain that I'm feeling. And I know it's not the right thing. I know it's not what I should be doing, but you know what? It will give me that momentary high that I'm looking for. And it will help me drown out everything else that's going on. Sure, we know we're not supposed to do it, but come on. It makes me feel better. I've always got forgiveness afterwards. At least I'll have momentary happiness. And so often sin becomes attractive. These things that we deal with our coping mechanisms. We have a bad day, and so instead of turning somewhere else, we turn to the bottle. Or instead of going and talking to someone, we say, you know what, I'm just going to drown myself and I'm just going to eat. Or I'm just going to binge watch Netflix. And understand, here's the thing. I'm not saying that you can't eat. I'm not saying that you can't binge watch Netflix every now and then. But if that is the pattern in your life, if that is the thing that you go to, if that is the thing that when this happens, here's my result. The thing that happens, here's what I do. Sometimes those things aren't healthy. And we need to be aware of that. Because sometimes in our life, those are the moments that it's the rumble strip that God's saying, listen, you're headed in the wrong direction. You need to refocus because this is not the way that you deal with life. This is not the way you deal with pain. This is not the way you deal with boredom. This is not the way you deal with success. This is not the way that you deal with fill in the blank. And here's the thing. Oftentimes we negate it with the negative. Something bad has happened, so I do this. And it can very, very much, our positive way, the way that we react to the positive in life can be unhealthy. You know, as much as you can say, well, I'm going to have a drink because I had a bad day, you can say, you know what, I deserve a drink or two because, man, I got a promotion at work and I'm going to have a good time. It's unhealthy. It's not the way that we should be responding to things. And so we need to be paying attention to this. And here's the thing. You're going to have to look at your own life and go, man, what are the unhealthy patterns that I have? You know, what are the things that I'm doing in life that aren't the way that they're supposed to be? And ask God, do I have any of these? You know, do I have any of these things that when I fall back on it, not that it's necessarily sin, because what does Paul say here? That I have the right to do everything, but you know what? Not everything is beneficial. Not everything is constructive. And so maybe there are some unhealthy patterns that I need to get rid of and pay attention to. So that's the first rumble strip, is unhealthy patterns. The second rumble strip is unproductive days. Ever get to the end of a day and you wondered what you did all day? And it's not because you haven't done anything all day. I mean, you've been going from one thing to the other. You just get to the end of your day and you're like, I don't know if I really did anything. Kind of give you a little homework assignment for this week. Not really homework, I won't ask you how you did, but something to pay attention to. This week, pay attention to how many times, if you ask someone how they're doing, they respond in one of two ways. They respond with, I'm busy, or I'm tired. And just pay attention to what happens. And how many times people respond that way. Man, how are you doing? Man, I am busy. Man, I'm tired. I've been running all day, and I've been going from here and there, and I am just tired. And again, it's not because our days have been empty or our days are so full that we don't know where we're going, but it's just one of those things that sometimes we do a whole lot and we don't really do a whole lot. Matthew 13. Jesus is talking to the crowd, and he gives the crowd a parable. It's a story, and it's the story of the seed and the sower. And you may be familiar with this. Jesus talks about this idea of seed being thrown onto 4 different types of soil. And in his story, and the way he describes it later on, the seed represents the Word of God. And the seed represents kind of how salvation takes root. But I think there's also something in Jesus' wise way of talking. Not only does he talk about salvation, but I think he talks about life in general. And specifically, that's when it comes to the third type of seed, or the seed that is thrown among the thorns. And in the parable, he talks about the thorns growing up and choking the seed. And his disciples later on come to him and go, Jesus, we got a question. We know you were talking about that parable. We know you had something to say, but we couldn't figure it out. So we need your help. We need you to tell us, what did you mean when you were talking about the soil and the seeds and all of this? And this is what he says in Matthew chapter 13, verse 22. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. And obviously there he's talking about salvation. He's talking about what happens, that worries creep in and choke what God had planted. But I think he's also talking about life here. Because look at what he talks about. The worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, they choke it out and they make it unfruitful. I think sometimes one of the warning signs, one of the rumble strips for us is when we have those unproductive days. And again, I'm not saying if you look back on Saturday and yesterday you go, man, I did not do a whole lot. That's okay if every now and then. It's okay to rest and relax, and we need that. But if you're looking at your last week, if you're looking at your last month and you're going, man, I've done a whole lot, but I don't know if I've really been productive. I don't know if I've really done things that matter. I don't know if I've really done things that are going to matter for all eternity. Maybe that's a rumble strip that I need to be aware of. And again, People wear busyness as a badge. Our days and calendars are full of stuff. But in the end, sometimes we really don't do anything that matters. Busyness, misplaced priorities, they can often bring some unproductiveness in our lives. And when that happens over time, I think sometimes it's God's way of waking us up and going, listen, you need to pay attention to what's happening because you're starting to drift. You're starting to get off course, and you need to come back and you need to get centered again. Because I've not designed you to be unproductive. I've not designed you to have non-fruitful days. I've designed you to be fruitful and to multiply and designed to enjoy life and accomplish things. And so we need to be aware of it. We need to be aware of that, man, sometimes maybe just my unproductive days, it's a sign of something that's happening. So you've got, man, mine went blank on the first one. Unhealthy patterns. You've got unproductive lives. And then the third rumble strip I think we have to be aware of is unpredictable emotions. Ever find yourself in a bad mood and you're not exactly sure why? We talk about, man, you just woke up on the wrong side of the bed. And if you've had kids, you know that happens sometimes. Owen and Emma have woken up on the wrong side of the bed. They're just in a bad mood and they don't know why. Maybe it's not in a bad mood per se, but you're just impatient. And, whatever you're doing is taking longer than what you expect. And it's not like you have anywhere to go or anything else that you want to do. It's just that what you're doing is taking longer than what you expected, and you get impatient. And you're not sure exactly why. You're just irritable. And, people around you are like, man, you just seem to be in a bad mood. And what's going on? You're like, I don't know. It's been a bad day. And you can't necessarily pinpoint what it is. You're just irritable and short with people. Maybe you just don't care. All of a sudden, you wake up one morning like, what? I don't care. I don't care what your problem is. That's your problem, and you deal with it. Maybe you're just kind of grown callous. It's sort of like people have to walk on eggshells around you because they're not quite sure how you're going to react. And there's just this unpredictable emotions. Now, when I talk about this, I think I need to make something clear. We live in a broken world, okay? And we see the effects of a broken world on our physical health all the time. We get sick. There are things that, our body aches in the morning. When, the older we get, it doesn't take much for us to injure ourselves, it seems like. And we live in the effects of a broken world. And not only do we see the effects of a broken world on our physical health, but I think we also see the effects of a broken world sometimes in our emotional and our mental health. And I realize that I believe that there are emotional and mental effects of the fall that some experience. There are some that struggle with depression and anxiety and worry, and they struggle with multiple reasons and multiple things when it comes to their mental and emotional state. And it's not because there's anything wrong with their faith journey. It's not because God is saying this is a rumble strip. What it is, there is a medical condition. And I think for the time being, we can separate those and say, if there's a medical condition and you're struggling with depression and you're struggling with anxiety, for a moment, just don't go, okay, there's something wrong with me. I think one of the things that is the effects of a broken world, and I don't know why some people deal with it, and I don't know why some people don't. I just know that people do. And there is not a weakness in having help in dealing with those things. And so oftentimes, I think as Christians, and I understand the intent, and I understand the heart behind it, but sometimes we're like, what? If you were really struggling or really strong in your faith, you wouldn't be struggling with depression. You wouldn't be struggling with anxiety. You wouldn't be struggling with these thoughts. And sometimes God, as much as we would go to the doctor if we had the flu or we had, something wrong with us that we needed a doctor to take care of, there is nothing wrong with going to a doctor and getting help when you have something wrong mentally and emotionally. There's nothing wrong with saying, what, I need this pill to help me with my depression. I need this pill to help me with my anxiety. There is nothing wrong with that because I think God designed those things. And can God deliver us? Absolutely. Sometimes I think God uses the marvels of modern medicine to help us in those things. And so I want to kind of separate that for a moment because I know sometimes there are mental or not mental, there are medical reasons why we are unpredictable in our emotions. And I want to separate that from what we're talking about here this morning. Because for a lot of us, we don't have any necessarily medical reasons for our unpredictability. We're just that, unpredictable. Or are we? Look at what Jesus says in Luke chapter 6, verses 43 through 45. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. And so as I read this, and I'm placing it with this idea of, okay, well, we've got these unpredictable emotions in our minds. All of a sudden, maybe these unpredictable emotions are a rumble strip of what's going on in the heart. The reason we're impatient is not because all of a sudden we're impatient, but there's something inside of us that's happening, and it's coming out as impatience. It's coming out as irritability. It's coming out as being short. It's coming out as these things that are manifesting itself, and we want to say it's unpredictable, but all the time God's saying, no, it's a rumble strip that you need to pay attention. There's something else going on that if you don't take care of, it's going to create some problems in your life. It's going to create some things that you're not going to like. And so I think one of the things that we need to look at is when these things happen is, okay, what is this a sign of something that's going on? Man, I am waking up and I am just in a bad mood. Man, I had a bad day at work, and I'm going to go home and I'm just going to yell at the kids, and the kids didn't do anything, but I'm just going to yell at them because that's just what I do. And again, it goes back to this unhealthy pattern. And it's because of our unpredictable emotions. And we have all these, and we're so divided. And maybe it's that moment that God is saying, listen, you need a wake-up call. You need to pay attention to what's going on in your life. So you've got unhealthy patterns. You've got unproductive days. You've got unpredictable emotions. And then the fourth thing that you've got is I think that we're unable to hear God. We come to church week after week, and we walk away with nothing. Now, Pastor wasn't talking to me today. That sermon was for somebody else. We never feel those promptings to talk to this person or go and do that. For lack of a better explanation, God seems silent. It's like we can't hear his voice. And we just go, someone will ask, well, when was the last time you heard God speak to you? And you're like, I don't know. I just don't, I go to church and I don't get anything out of it. I don't hear that still small voice. And we kind of, it's what Elijah, in 1 Kings 13, he's up on the mountaintop, and this is what the Lord said to him. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. And this is where God was. God was in that gentle whisper, in that moment for, Elijah. And I think sometimes we want the earthquake, we want the fire, we want those big things that God's voice is so overwhelming that we can't help but hear it. And sometimes God says, that's not how I'm going to operate. Sometimes I will. But in the majority of the times, I'm going to operate in the stillness and the smallness and the quietness. And then when we get quiet and we begin to listen, and we open ourselves up sometimes to what we think is hearing the voice of God, we can't hear that gentle whisper. We don't know the last time he spoke to us. And maybe it's because we don't know the last time that we gave him the opportunity to speak to us. You think, well, I came to church. I gave God 30 minutes where Matt was on the stage and he was speaking. That was the time that if God was going to speak to me, he surely would speak to me then. But we walk away Sunday after Sunday, and we don't hear anything. And here's the amazing thing. I've been a pastor for, 2020 now, for 22 years. It's amazing how many times I've had people come to me, and they say, you know what, I need to go to another church because I'm just not getting fed. I'm just not hearing God. And it's a nice way of telling the pastor, listen, you haven't said anything in the last time that's spoken to me. I understand sometimes it is on me. And I understand that my preparation that I do, Monday through Friday about the sermons and even longer than that, I do need to pay attention. And I do need to be aware of what God is saying to me so that I can in turn say something to you. But at the same time, I find it very hard to believe that you could attend a church for months and for years. And if the pastor and the people that are involved in teaching and bringing the word and doing those things are giving the time that they need in preparation, that God isn't speaking. And sometimes when we can't hear the voice of God, I think it's a sign that God's saying, okay, you need to pay attention because there's something that's happening here. And here's the thing about these rumble strips. When we hear it, it's a wake-up call to do something before it gets worse. Rumble strips let us know, listen, if you keep going in this direction, if you keep going with this pattern, if you keep doing this thing, things will not end well. Because here's the thing, the rumble strip is not the ditch. The rumble strip is what happens before you get to the ditch. The rumble strip is that thing that says, you know what, I want to grab your attention because there's something bad that's coming and it's a place that you don't want to be. And so it's that moment to wake ourselves up and say, you know what, I need to refocus. I need to get my life back on track. I need to make sure that I'm not drifting too far to the right or to the left. And so here's the thing. You don't need to hit the panic button the first time that you hear those tires cross over. It's not like we throw and we completely redo our life because, wow, I've gone so far off course. No, it's that those moments that we say, you know what, I need to pay attention. I need to wake up and go, wow, maybe I am starting to drift. So the question becomes is how do we correct ourselves? How do we correct ourselves if we're finding ourselves in unhealthy patterns or unproductive days or unpredictable emotions or we're unable to hear God? How do we correct ourselves? And I think there's three things that we do. The first is we need to refocus. Psalms 86:11 tells us this, teach me your ways, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart, that I may fear your name. Many times, the reason that we've drifted isn't so much that we're looking to the right or to the left. Because we know, and we've driven, those of us that have driven for a long enough time, I've driven for, close to 26, 27 years now. I've learned that I can look in the off to the left or right, and the car's not going to go that way. But you ever find yourself on a long, straight stretch of road? Maybe the kids and the wife are asleep, or your spouse is asleep in the car, and all of a sudden you're looking down road, but you're really not focused on anything down the road. You're just kind of staring out into the windshield, like, okay, there's a lot of green grass ahead of me, or whatever it may be. And it's in those moments that you kind of zone out, and your eyes are looking forward, but the car starts to drift. And all of a sudden, you hear that rumble, going on, and the wife wakes up and goes, "Are you okay? Do you need me to drive?" You're like, "No, I'm fine. I'm just driving along. Nothing's, And it's not that we're looking to the right or to the left. But we just lose focus. We lose focus on what's ahead of us. We lose focus on what's coming up along the road. Sometimes I think that happens in life. We're not really looking to get off of course from the direction that we're headed. It's just that we're not real focused on it either. It's not that we're looking to wow, look at that group of deer over there, and all of a sudden we find ourselves, in the ditch. But sometimes it's just like we're not focused on where we're going either. You ever have those moments, especially when you're familiar with a stretch of road, that you stop and question yourself a moment, did I stop at that stop sign? And you're like, I think I did, but I don't remember it. But you're like, I'm sure I saw it, And sometimes you have those moments. You're like, did I stop? Or I don't remember driving this stretch of road, even though, and it's not that we're sleeping. It's not that we're not paying attention. Well, it's just because we're not paying attention. And so a little drift begins to happen. And the tires start to rumble a little bit. And so sometimes in life, we just need to refocus on where we're at. It's that reminder of who God wants us to be. It's that reminder of what he wants us to do. And we just come to God and say, God, give me an undivided heart. I don't want to be paying attention to everything else. I don't want to lose focus. I want to stay focused on you. So God, give me an undivided heart. Help me refocus on who you want me to be. And then once we refocus, I think we also need to renew ourselves as well. Paul writes in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice, holy and pleasing God. This is your true and proper worship. And this is the part I want us to pay attention to. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. Sometimes when it comes to our unhealthy patterns, we just need to change the way that we think. We need to renew our mind and go, okay, this is not the healthy way of dealing with this. This is not the healthy way of dealing with anxiety. This is not the healthy way of dealing with boredom. This is not the healthy way of dealing with my day. Those things that we have, and I think sometimes we hit those rumble strips because we haven't changed our thinking. We've adopted the world's way of coping with things. And here's the thing. we make exceptions to it. We're like, okay, God, I know that, I'm not supposed to, I'm come back to this. God, I know I'm not supposed to get drunk because that's in Scripture. But God, it's okay to have a drink every now and then. It helps me cope. It helps me deal with the day. It helps me unwind. It helps make me feel better. And again, I'm not saying that if you have a drink every now and then that you're sinning. But I'm going, maybe in our minds, if that's what's causing us, and if that's what we're going to say, this will help me relax, this will help me to do fill in the blank, whatever it is, I wonder if we haven't fallen into the world's way of thinking. Because listen, there's a world out there that will tell you, if you want to feel this, just buy this. If you're having a problem with this, just do this, and it will make you feel better. If you're anxious about things, listen, we've got a whole bunch of products that will help you not feel anxious anymore. And here's the thing, you'll have people that will swear by these products. Hey, here's how it worked for me. And again, not debating the validity of it or not, but if that's where we're finding our comfort or our fulfillment or whatever it is, we just need to change the way that we think sometimes. And go, you know what, that may be something that I like to do, but you know what? That's not where I'm going to find my fulfillment. That's not where I'm going to find my focus. That's not where I'm going to find my comfort. I'm going to find it in who God is and who He wants me to be. And so sometimes I just think we need to renew our mind because we've fallen into the trap of thinking the way that the world thinks. We need to remind ourselves of what we've already believed about God and who He is and who He wants to be. Getting back into the Word to find out how to keep that focus and to renew ourselves and to say, okay, God, if I don't want to drift and I don't want to find myself in unhealthy patterns, I don't want to find myself in unpredictable emotions, all of these things, help me renew my mind. Help me change the way that I think so I can become better. And then when we do that, we've got to respond. It's not just about refocusing and then renewing and going, okay, that was good, but we need to respond. Look at what David writes in Psalms 119. It says, do good to your servant according to your word, Lord. Teach me knowledge and good judgment, for I trust your commands. Then catch this, before I was afflicted, I went astray. I drifted. I got off course. But now I obey your word. You are good, and what you do is good. Teach me your decrees. Though the arrogant have smeared me with lies, I keep your precepts with all my heart. Their hearts, and catch this, I think this is where he comes with the unpredictable emotions. Their hearts are callous and unfeeling, but I delight in your law. It was good for me to be afflicted so that I might learn your decrees. If I were to write this in today's day language and what we're talking about this morning, you might just want to put that, it was good for me to hit that rumble strip, because when I hit that rumble strip, it woke me up. And when it woke me up, I turned back to you and I said, okay, God, I need to get refocused. I don't want to be astray anymore. I don't want to go and be undivided anymore. God, I want to be focused on you and who you want me to be. And the wonderful thing about God is I think He gives us these rumble strips to keep us on course. But here's the danger. Rumble strips only work for so long. Because what happens when the last set of rumble tires crosses that rumble strip? Especially on the highway, you've got that moment where it's quiet again. There's that moment where before you hit the ditch, you're not going to hear the rumbling of the rumble strips because you've passed over that. And they're not effective anymore. And it gets eerily quiet. For some this morning, you may not be hearing rumble strips because you've already passed them. For some this morning, those unhealthy patterns, those unproductive days, those unpredictable emotions, that unable to hear the voice of God, you're sitting here thinking, man, I'm not having any of those things in my life. I must be pretty good. And all the time, God's saying, yeah, you remember a year ago when you heard those things? That was the rumble strip that you should have paid attention to. And now you've crossed over. And, man, you're headed straight for that ditch, and you need to wake up. Maybe you're here this morning, and as I've talked, God's tapped you on the shoulder and said, that noise you've been hearing, that's that unhealthy pattern that you've been forming in your life. And you know what? I'm trying to wake you up. I'm trying to get you to pay attention because I don't want you to go into the ditch. I don't want you to go off onto the side of the road or cross over that center line into oncoming traffic, because that's not where you want to be. It's not where I want you to be. And so maybe this morning God's tapping you on the shoulder and saying, you know what, that rumble strip, that noise you've been hearing, it is the wake-up call to get refocused because you're starting to drift. Don't ignore that. As silly as it would be for us if we're driving a car to ignore that rumble strip because we know it's not going to end well, it is the same way with our spiritual life. It is silly for us to ignore those rumble strips that God puts in our life to make sure that we don't have a divided heart. To make sure that when we're getting too far off to the right or the left and we want our days to matter, we want our days to be weighed, that we want to be focused, and how do we do this? God says, let me show you how do you do this. And I'm going to keep you from going too far to the right or to the left and to remain in the center, because in the center is where I want you to be. So this morning, listen. Listen for the rumble strips. Listen for those things that God puts in our life that's that wake-up call. You know what? I need to get back on my life. I need to regain focus, regain who I am. And the grace of God is always there. The grace of God is always there to help us come back. But we need to listen. I hope that your bucket list, whatever is on it, as you live your life, God will do some amazing things. While your days are numbered, may they be weighed, and may you live them with an undivided heart and an undivided focus, that God will do some incredible things. Heavenly Father, this morning we thank you for who you are. And God, for those moments in life when you send those rumble strips to wake us up and say, get back on track, stop drifting. And God, each of us through this series, maybe we've come face to face with the fact that our days are numbered and we are not guaranteed tomorrow. And so we want today to count. We want today to find weight in who we are and the way that we live. And God, the only way that we can do it is when we have an undivided heart and an undivided life, and that, Father, we are focused on you. And so, God, in those areas where we're getting off course, those areas where maybe we're having some unhealthy patterns, maybe we're having some unproductive days or some unpredictable emotions, or we're just unable to hear your voice, God, maybe a wake-up call for us. May in your gentle voice you bring us back into the road and in the way that you want us to go. And Father, maybe we respond. God, give us an undivided heart. A heart that seeks you. A heart that desires to be who you've called us to be. And Father, when we do that, we know that our days will have meaning. We know that however many days you give us here on earth, that Father, we will live them to the full. And we will live life the way that you've intended us to live. So Father, this morning, help us. Help us to live undivided lives and to respond when we hear the rumble strips. And we ask all this in your name. Amen.